The wind howled off the Atlantic, sharp as a blade, slicing through Nora Harper's sweater as she stood on the cliffside porch of her Maine backyard. Below, the ocean churned, gray and restless, spitting foam against jagged rocks. Her hands, calloused from years of hauling marine samples and now singed from a recent fire, gripped the railing. The air smelled of salt and scorched grass, a reminder of the spark that nearly devoured her wildflower garden 2 nights ago. She squinted at the horizon where storm clouds loomed like an uninvited guest. A nor'easter was coming, and with it, her wedding day. Nora's phone buzzed in her pocket, the screen flashing Vivienne. Her mother's name felt like a splinter under her skin. She let it ring, each vibration a taunt, until it fell silent. The text that followed was worse. A backyard wedding? It looks like a craft project gone wrong. You're better than this, Nora. Her chest tightened. Vivian, the retired actress whose Broadway glory days still dictated her every judgment, had no interest in Nora's vision. A wedding woven from driftwood, wildflowers, and bioluminescent-spired LEDs she'd hand-wired herself, each glowing orb mimicking the deep-sea creatures she studied. Vivienne wanted chandeliers, not lanterns, ballrooms, not cliffs, social capital, not love. Nora sank onto the porch steps, the wood creaking under her weight. She stared at the embossed, seaweed-scented invitation she'd sent her mother weeks ago, now crumpled in her pocket. No RSVP. No surprise. Vivian had scoffed at the idea from the start, her voice dripping venom over the phone. A backyard? That's for peasants. The words had shattered Nora then, and they stung again now, as fresh as the wind biting her cheek. James, her fiancé, emerged from the house, his carpenter's hands cradling a chipped mug of chamomile tea. His flannel shirt was dusted with sawdust from the driftwood altar he'd been carving all morning, its curves mimicking the ocean's waves. He didn't speak, just set the mug beside her and sat, his presence steady as the cliffs beneath them. Nora's whisper broke the silence. She said no. James's jaw tightened, but he only rested a hand on her knee. He knew Vivienne's cruelty, had seen it in the way she dismissed Nora's dreams as hobbies, and her wedding as disappointing. He'd been there when Nora, heartbroken, recounted how she'd been homeschooled at Vivienne's insistence, isolated from peers to fuel her mother's vision of a perfect daughter, and he'd held her after Lottie's lavish wedding, where Nora, dressed in cheap flats that blistered her feet, had been relegated to the help, tagged in one blurry photo, with a caption that stung worse than the shoes. Nora sipped the tea, its warmth grounding her. The garden below glowed faintly, her LED lanterns casting an otherworldly shimmer across the wildflowers she and James had planted. Lupins, sea roses, and asters swayed in the wind, their colors vivid against the gray sky. It was a reclamation, this wedding, not sabotage, as Lottie, her influencer sister, had sneered. Lottie, whose own wedding had been a spectacle of crystal and excess, saw Nora's intimate gathering of 25 guests, shared bread, and no bridal party as a budget stunt. But Nora didn't want a Broadway show. She wanted this, a rugged grove, a driftwood altar, and James. Yet danger lurked in the details. The fire 2 nights ago hadn't been an accident. Nora had been wiring lanterns on a ladder, the nor'easter's first gust nearly sweeping her off, when a spark ignited the dry grass. She'd burned her hands extinguishing it, the pain sharp but fleeting compared to the dread that followed. Someone had tampered with the wires. She'd found them frayed, deliberately cut, and then there was her truck, its brakes failing on a twisting coastal road last week, sending her careening toward a guardrail. She'd survived, barely. The riptide that trapped her while gathering seaweed for the invitations. James had pulled her from the current, his face pale with fear. Last night, she'd caught the intruder, a shadow in the garden, scissors glinting as they snipped her lantern wires. Nora had chased them, her boots sinking into the mud, but they'd vanished into the pines. The next morning, a note slipped under her door. "Back out, or it gets worse." The handwriting was unfamiliar, but Vivian's disdain echoed in every word. Nora hadn't told James yet. She didn't want to scare him, not when he'd poured his heart into their altar, not when the wedding was tomorrow. The wind picked up, rattling the lanterns. Nora's gaze drifted to the cliff's edge, where the drop was steep and the rocks below unforgiving. She wasn't just fighting her mother's disapproval or her sister's mockery. Someone wanted her wedding, and maybe her life, to fail. The question was who? Vivian, with her endless need for control? Lottie, whose jealousy flared whenever Nora dared to shine? Or someone else, hidden in the shadows of this coastal town? Nora's backyard wasn't just a venue, it was a battleground. She'd spent months transforming it, hauling soil to tame the rocky earth, planting wildflowers that could withstand Maine's brutal winters. The LEDs were her masterpiece, each one handcrafted to glow like the bioluminescent plankton she'd studied as a marine biologist. She'd wired them late at night, her fingers raw from twisting copper, her mind alive with visions of anglerfish and viperfish, their eerie light translated into something beautiful. Vivian had never asked about the designs, never cared that Nora's work had earned her a grant to study deep-sea ecosystems. To Vivian, Nora was still the homeschooled girl who'd never quite measured up. The memory of Lottie's wedding burned hotter. Nora had been 22, awkward in a borrowed dress, her role reduced to fetching champagne and adjusting centerpieces. Vivian had whispered, "Your turn will come," but her tone was pitying, as if Nora's dreams were a child's scribbles. Lottie, radiant in a $10,000 zero-cents gown, hadn't even thanked her. The blurry photo tagged "The Help" had been Lottie's final jab, a public reminder of Nora's place. Now, with her own wedding, Nora was rewriting that story. No gowns, no guest lists, just love and a cliffside vow. But Vivian and Lottie weren't the only threats. The accidents, the fire, the breaks, the riptide felt orchestrated. Nora hadn't grown up in a world of trust. Vivian's homeschooling had been less about education and more about control, keeping Nora dependent, her social circle limited to her mother's orbit. Friends were rare. Enemies, it seemed, were not. The intruder in the garden had been real, their scissors glinting under the moonlight. Nora's hands shook as she recalled the chase, the mud sucking at her boots, the pines swallowing the figure whole. She hadn't told the police. In a small town like this, gossip spread faster than truth, and Nora didn't need whispers undermining her wedding. James stood, brushing sawdust from his jeans. "We'll make it perfect," he said, his voice low but certain. He didn't know about the note or the intruder, but he sensed her fear. Nora forced a smile, her burned hands hidden in her sleeves. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that their love could weather the storm, literal and otherwise. But the note's warning lingered, "Back out, or it gets worse." The next morning, the nor'easter's edge arrived, gray skies pressing low. Nora woke to the sound of rain pelting the roof, her stomach knotted with dread. The wedding was hours away, and the garden was a mess. Lanterns swaying wildly, wildflowers bent under the wind's assault. She pulled on her raincoat and boots, determined to save what she could. James was already outside, securing the altar with ropes, his hair plastered to his face. They worked in silence, the storm's roar drowning out their thoughts. As Nora rewired a lantern, her fingers stinging from the burns, she spotted something in the mud, a scrap of fabric, crimson and silky, caught on a thorn. It wasn't hers. She stuffed it into her pocket, her pulse quickening. Vivian's wardrobe was full of crimson, scarves, dresses, always dramatic. But Vivian was in New York, wasn't she? Or had she sent someone to sabotage Nora's day? The guests arrived at dusk, bundled in coats, their faces lit by the lantern's glow. 25 people, friends and colleagues who knew Nora's heart, not her mother's fame. They shared bread, laughed over mismatched plates, and toasted with local cider. The altar stood firm, its driftwood gleaming under the storm's fading light. Nora wore a simple dress, her hair loose, seaweed braided into it. James, in a linen shirt, looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered. But as Nora walked toward the altar, her eyes caught a flicker in the pines. A shadow moved, too deliberate to be the wind. Her breath hitched. The intruder was here, watching. She gripped James's hand, her voice steady as she said her vows, but her mind raced. Vivian's text, the cut wires, the crimson scrap pieces of a puzzle she hadn't solved. The nor'easter's last gusts faded, and the flowers glowed vivid against the gray. It was beautiful, but it wasn't safe. As the guests clapped, Nora's gaze locked on the pines. The shadow was gone, but the threat remained. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a declaration, and someone, maybe Vivienne, maybe Lottie, maybe a stranger, wanted it to fail. Nora wouldn't let them win. Not today, not ever. The garden path was a mosaic of mismatched chairs, each tied with a ribbon Nora had knotted herself, their colors seafoam, ochre, lavender, fluttering like flags against the Maine wind. The nor'easter had relented, leaving a bruised sky that made the wildflowers blaze. Nora stood at the cliff's edge, her cream gown, sewn by Maeve, hugging her frame. Its pockets, a practical touch, held a sprig of sea lavender and the crumpled note from the intruder. Back out or it gets worse. The dress felt like armor, holding her together as she twisted her hair, tucking the lavender behind her ear. Maeve, her textile artist friend, adjusted the hem and whispered, "You look like yourself." Nora nodded, her throat tight. "That's enough." It was October 8th, 2025, 4:12 p.m. The ceremony began without fanfare. No officiant, no procession, just Nora and James at the driftwood altar, their vows raw and private, spoken only to each other. The 25 guests, seated on those ribbon-tied chairs, leaned in, catching fragments of promises carried by the wind. "I choose you, storms and all," James said, his carpenter's hands steadying hers. Nora's voice cracked. "You're my shore." Their kiss was soft, unscripted, and the guests clapped heartily, their cheers mingling with birdsong. Dinner was family style, enamel pots brimming with lobster stew and roasted root vegetables, passed hand to hand. No servers, no pretense, just bread, broken together. As night fell, Nora's bioluminescent-spired LEDs glowed like fireflies, casting an ethereal light over the grove. Maeve, sipping cider, leaned close. "This looks like a movie." Nora smiled, her eyes on James. "It's home." Lila, a documentarian with a knack for capturing truth, filmed it all. Her lens followed Nora tying ribbons that morning, her hands trembling from the burns she hid. It caught James, nervous, adjusting his linen shirt, and the guests' laughter as they planted their seed paper place cards in the garden's soil. The 90-second film ended with Nora and James dancing barefoot under the lanterns, her gown swaying, his arms anchoring her. Lila handed Nora the file, saying, "This is memory, not performance." Nora posted it online that night. October 8th, home, love. By noon, it had 50,000 views. Blogs clamored to feature it, viral articles doubling it the most beautiful backyard wedding. Strangers commented, "This is what love looks like." But the messages that cut deepest came from family. Lottie's voicemail was breathless. "Why didn't you tell us it was like that?" Vivian's text was colder. "Is this the wedding I wasn't invited to?" Nora's jaw clenched. She had invited Vivienne. The seaweed-scented invitation, embossed with care, had been torn in half. She'd found the pieces in Vivian's trash during a visit to New York. Another text followed. "You made us look terrible." Nora didn't reply. She was done explaining herself to a mother who saw weddings as social currency, not vows. The viral video brought warmth, but also danger. 2 days after the wedding, Nora found a new note wedged in her mailbox. Fame won't save you. The handwriting matched the first, its threat sharper now. She hadn't told James about the intruder or the sabotaged lantern wires, but the weight was crushing her. The crimson fabric she'd found in the mud, silky, Vivian's signature, gnawed at her. Was her mother capable of this? Or was it Lottie, whose jealousy had always simmered cloaked in influencer smiles? Nora invited Vivian to screen Lila's full footage in a Portland studio, hoping for clarity. The room was dim, the air thick with unspoken history. Vivian sat, her crimson scarf a taunt as the film played. Nora's vows, James's steady gaze, the lantern's glow. Nora watched her mother's face, searching for remorse. When the screen faded, Vivian's voice was clipped. "It's quaint." Nora's patience snapped. "Did you care? About me? Ever?" Vivian flinched, her polished facade cracking. "You were always so self-sufficient," she said, as if it excused years of neglect. Then, quieter, "I erased you from Lottie's photos. You didn't fit the narrative." The admission hit like a wave. Nora remembered that wedding, her blisters, her borrowed dress, the blurry photo tagged, the help. Vivian had orchestrated it all, ensuring Nora stayed invisible. "Why?" Nora asked, her voice barely a whisper. Vivian looked away. "Lottie was the star. You were collateral." Nora left the studio, her hands shaking. Back home, a package waited on the porch. A photo from Lottie's wedding, Nora in the background, her face clear for once. A note was tucked inside, in Vivian's elegant scrawl. "I looked past you then. I see you now." Nora stared at it, torn between hope and distrust. She tucked it behind a wedding photo of her and James, unsure if it was an apology or a trap. The danger escalated. A week later, Nora woke to a slashed tire on her truck, the same one whose brakes had failed. She called the local mechanic, who confirmed sabotage. Someone had cut the brake line clean. Her mind raced to the riptide, the fire, the intruder. She finally told James, showing him the notes and the crimson fabric. His face darkened. "This stops now," he said, pulling her close. But Nora wasn't sure it could. Leela, sensing the tension, offered to dig deeper. She had contacts in town, people who noticed things others missed. Over coffee, she shared a lead. A local handyman, Ethan, had been seen near Nora's property the night of the fire. Ethan, with a rap sheet for petty theft, worked odd jobs for wealthy out-of-towners like Vivian. Nora's stomach churned. Had her mother hired him to scare her? Or was Ethan acting alone, resentful of Nora's viral fame in a town that rarely celebrated its own? The romance of the wedding lingered, but it was tangled with suspicion. Nora and James stole moments of lightness, laughing as they planted the guest seed paper, joking about their barefoot dance going viral. "We're basically influencers now," James teased, dodging Nora's playful swat. But the humor faded when Nora found a third note, taped to the driftwood altar. "You can't hide forever." Lila's investigation uncovered a twist. Ethan wasn't just a handyman. He'd been Lottie's high school fling, a secret she'd buried under her polished persona. Lottie, who'd mocked Nora's wedding as a budget stunt, had been in town the week of the fire, not in LA as she'd claimed. Nora confronted her over the phone, keeping her tone light but pointed. "Funny how you're always around when things go wrong," she said. Lottie laughed, too shrill. "You're paranoid, Nora. Not everything's about you." But the call ended abruptly, and Nora caught the edge in her sister's voice. Guilt or fear? The tension peaked at a Seattle gallery, where Lila's full film screened for an audience of strangers. The room was packed, the air humming with anticipation. Nora and James sat in the back, her hand in his, as the film unfolded, their vows, the lanterns, the dance. Strangers cried, their sniffles filling the silence, but Nora's eyes were on the crowd, scanning for a familiar face. Vivian? Lottie? Or Ethan? Halfway through, she saw him. Ethan, in a worn jacket, slipping through a side door. Her pulse spiked. She nudged James, who followed her as she trailed Ethan outside. The alley was dark, the air sharp with rain. Ethan turned, his face pale under a streetlight. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he blurted before Nora could speak. "She paid me to scare you, not hurt you." "Who?" Nora demanded, though she feared the answer. Ethan's eyes darted away. "Your sister, Lottie. She said you were stealing her spotlight." The betrayal cut deeper than Vivienne's cruelty. Lottie, her own sister, had orchestrated the notes, the fire, the slashed tire. But before Ethan could say more, a car screeched around the corner, its headlights blinding. Nora grabbed James's arm, pulling him back as the car sped past, missing them by inches. Ethan bolted, vanishing into the night. Back inside, the film's final frames played. Nora and James, barefoot, laughing under the lanterns. The audience applauded, oblivious to the danger outside. Nora forced a smile, but her mind was elsewhere. Lottie's jealousy had turned deadly, and Ethan was still out there. The wedding was over, but the storm was just beginning. The next morning, Nora and James sat on their porch, the cliff's edge looming behind them. The viral video had brought love, but also enemies. Nora traced the burns on her hands, now healing, and leaned into James. "We're stronger than this," she said. He kissed her forehead. "Always." But as they sipped coffee, a new text buzzed on Nora's phone, from an unknown number. "You think it's over? Ask Vivienne about the riptide." Nora's blood ran cold. Lottie wasn't the only one hiding secrets. Vivienne's crimson scarf, her torn invitation, her sudden apology. Pieces of a puzzle that didn't yet fit. The glow of the wedding lingered, but the shadows were closing in.